Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to the seminar today. So this seminar is going to be to the point. I'm going to try to keep it short because everybody has got a ton of work to do. But the main purpose of the seminar is, of course, to shed some light on the way sales works here at GVA. Sometimes you ask me questions, I answer your questions, but this will be a good overview of how we do everything. So to start things off, you're probably wondering, what does a typical GVA account manager do here at GVA? This is probably what most people think we do. And this is what production thinks we do. Now, how many production people do we have here? Nick's not here, I see. And engineers, of course. This is what we think we do. It stands for coding. And lastly, what we actually do. On the other side will be Nick. So here's an outline of the presentation. We're going to get into the architectural lighting specification process, the players that get involved in the sales, the role of our lighting reps, why does GVA get specified, and other sales channels aside from the typical architectural sales process. So here is the beginning of an architectural specification sales process. So it starts here. Starts at the concept level. So lighting designer conceptualizes the lighting scheme. And usually for a larger scale project, there can be more than one lighting designer involved at the very beginning. So the lighting designer has to come up with a concept, and then they try to sell the concept to the owner, and then eventually they get awarded the project to do further work on the project. As part of the conceptualization, or soon after the project is awarded, there's a mock-up. So what happens in the mock-up is the lighting designer tests the hypothesis. So they have a vision about lighting, and they would use manufacturers' samples to test out how well it works. So they would do their mock-ups, and sometimes also manufacturers come head-to-head against each other in these type of mock-ups. After that, or alongside the manufacturer's mock-up, there are photometry studies because there are codes for illumination levels, or their expectations on evenness of lighting. That's why we put a lot of effort into the optics that we develop. So that's all done in the photometry studies. And then also involved our preliminary budgeting. So at this point, we put in our preliminary budget. And so lighting designer goes back to the owner and said, we need X amount of dollars on this project. And at the end of it, fixture specification get written. So typically they would write, for example, a GVA fixture to be used for type A1, for example. And for type A1, you need 600 lumens per foot, you need 10 watts per foot, etc. So that becomes part of the spec going forward.
1 second. Question. When is the bidding taking place? At one stage? Or between what stages?
I think it's on slide number 5, so we're going to go. So, for example, this is a conceptual drawing. You can see it's sometimes it's rendering, sometimes it can be hand sketch. It's informal, depends on whatever the owner needs or whatever the lighting designer needs to convey the idea. So this here is an example of vertical runs of highlighters. You see 4 runs in each group, and there's 12 runs in total on top of a building. This is the crown of a skyscraper in Brooklyn. So you can see this is, at the very beginning, this is preliminary. It's not very technical. So after that comes the construction development, or the CD. So by the way, typically when you look at drawings from an architect or an engineering group on a project, you would see CD or DD in the notes. So DD can be anywhere from 10% DD to 100% DD. Once it reaches 100% DD, that means the design development has been done. And then it moves on to the construction development, where more works comes in to make everything work. So in the construction development, also drawings can be issued at 5%, 10%, up to 100%. Typically, electrical and mechanical engineers finalize engineering drawings. Details regarding power, wiring, and controls are discussed. These questions are posed. People look at, for existing buildings, they look at where the entry and exit points can be and make sure all the lighting specifications specified can work with existing requirements. So here's an example of a fixture specification. So what you see here is, first of all, the type number. You have lamp, which is a performance spec, and then you have the performance criteria in the description. So here it says IP66, meaning it has to be outdoor. There is a length, generalized length description. It also shows 30-degree beam, for example. It also talks about accessories. For example, it specifies louvers. These type of comments are very important on a specification because by not including the accessories, the contractors and the distributors, when it comes to bidding time, can skip out on some of the accessories, and they will be under budgeting versus how much they really need to supply this part of the project. There's also customizations. In this example here, you have a modified 2 linear wall arm bracket. So in this case, they're asking for a specific bracket from GVA, which MRSA helped to develop. So as you can see, imagine this document, because all of the information that's transmitted from the specifier to the distributor to the contractor has to be in writing. That makes it trackable. And also sometimes the specifier might be very far away geographically from where the job site is. So all the information has to be included in a specification, written specification. So additional information includes the voltage, which is 277. 277 is a very popular voltage in the USA for exterior lighting. Sometimes they also include alternates, more often than not. So in this case, we see our competitors on here, Insight and Acclaim. So Insight and Acclaim are, for example, 2 more budget competitors compared to ours. And there's also notes about dimming protocol to be used for control. So here is the part that George asked about a moment ago, the purchase part. So contractors end up bidding on a project. Contractors have to work with distributors to do the bid. So they work together, they put in their bid, it may go over budget. So when a project goes over budget, typically the scope can be revised. So they make lighting fixtures smaller for this section, or they take off some of the lighting fixtures, or make some changes. So that happens after the bidding. But of course, if everything goes okay at the bid, then they can just skip this step. And in addition to changing the scope, which is something they have to do and then issue a rebid, what they can also do is a value engineering. So value engineering is just a fancy term for swapping out something that's more expensive with something that's cheaper. So that's what value engineering happens. And lastly, when everything gets approved and finalized, submittals are sent to specifiers for approval. And once that's sent, products supplied to the project must match approved submittal drawings, unless we encounter some extreme cases of site conditions. So for example, this is...
John,
yes?
are you going to be talking about the packaging from agents as well?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
So here's approved submittals. So this is a cover page that we typically see on a return set of approval submittals. So this is a cover page. Typically it shows check marks will be done for reviewed, and then sometimes, most of the time it says no exceptions taken, which means whatever is on the spec, if they specify louvers in black, it has to be in black. Same with brackets. Same thing with fixture length. Everything should be done, no exceptions taken. Or sometimes they say exception as noticed. So they approve everything, but they want to make the louver white instead of black. So for minor changes, people don't go back and forth. They do exception as noted, and then these are released for purchasing. So usually accompanying these cover sheets are spec sheets from various manufacturers. And so it could be our SG9 spec sheet or our Lira spec sheet, for example. And then also accompanying the manufacturer spec sheet can be customized drawings. For example, if we have custom mounting arms, then those drawings go into the submittal as well, just so that everybody understands what needs to be ordered and installed. So here are the major players. So yes, go ahead.
At what stage are we submitting samples, for example? Because you had in one of your items on that slide, submittal of samples. Is it before bidding or after bidding? That's my question.
Good question. So let's go back to a couple of slides in front. So sample submission can occur anytime from design development up until the very end before bidding. Typically, that's what happens. So for different reasons, during design development, lighting designers need samples to review or test their hypothesis. So they can use samples at that stage. But for example, they use these samples to do some mock-up, and then they are satisfied. But then they do photometry studies, and then they think the lighting level is too low. Then at that point, they can ask for samples again. So basically, they can ask for samples any time before they purchase a project. But of course, once they put in the PO to purchase a project, then it's pointless to ask for samples again. So for example, when we reach here, then the mechanical engineer, he might ask for samples because you have a little channel to fit your fixture. He's not sure whether everything will fit, then he will ask for a sample for mechanical fitting. So it's basically the same as envisioning if you're redoing your kitchen, you need some lights. You encounter all kinds of logistical problems, whether it's electrical or controls or just mechanically making it fit. So people request for samples for various reasons.
How long does each stage take? Like the DD and the CD, what would be the average DD time period?
I would say there's two factors affecting it. One is how fast does the project needs to move. If the project needs to move at light speed, then everybody works at light speed to make it work. So that can take, from DD to finish, that can take even 2 weeks, as short as 2 weeks.
So the DD include the NPI that we do over here, correct?
Sorry?
The DD will include the NPIs
And
that we do in here,
NPI, like new product, you mean?
new product productions.
We're kind of talking about existing products here. So,
Okay.
yeah.
But alternatively, it could also take years. It
Yes.
could take years for this to come to life. Somebody can do all the design work, and 2-3 years later, then it gets purchased, right? So it depends on, like John said,
Yeah.
what the project requires.
By which time most of our products are outdated already changed.
Yeah, for example, Prince Edward Viaduct on Bloor Street. It took forever. And even the lighting fixture that was originally proposed, if I'm correct, we replaced it with our newer generation too, right?
Yeah, the design work was done months prior, but actually that one went relatively quickly, like within a year.
Mm-hmm.
We had meetings with the designer like every single week to make sure we were on track. Our delivery was quite quick, but the design work was done before we even got involved, so.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so some notes about the players. This is a generalized diagram. Of course, it varies from project to project. Typically, you have ownership, who has the money, who end up paying for everything, and they typically own the building. Ownership hires architects. Ownership might hire lighting designers, or architect might hire a lighting designer. There's electrical engineers involved, and there's general contractors involved. And of course, this diagram is simplified for GVA from the lighting side. There's much more parties involved in an actual construction project. So like I said, architect can hire the lighting designer. Electrical engineer sometimes can also hire a lighting designer. And sometimes what we discover is lighting designers can be part of an architect's firm or an electrical engineer firm, could be a division. And of course, the general contractor has to hire an electrical contractor for the work. So lighting designers sometimes put in their requests to the electrical contractor, so they tend to talk to each other. And electrical engineers, of course, has to talk to the electrical contractors. And for larger scale projects, you have a system integrator, so who typically gets involved with the electrical contractors. These guys tell these guys exactly what needs to be done. And ownership, of course, has to talk to the system integrator because they want the right effects to be in place at the very end of the projects. There's electrical distributors who the electrical contractors work with. And of course, there's lighting rep agencies. So lighting rep agencies kind of have a complex role. They can talk to the architects. They can have a good connection with the architects. They can have a good connection with the lighting designers. They can have a good connection with the electrical engineers. They can be connected through the electrical distributor. or they can be connected to a system integrator. So you can see these guys fill in a lot of different roles depending on the market and the project. And of course, they talk to the ownership as well. But so depending on how complex the design is and how complex the project is, sometimes you might end up with a lot of lighting reps involved. So this can be the local lighting rep who knows the local electrical distributor and the ownership. But then architects might be in another city working with lighting rep agency B. And the lighting designer might be in a third city working with a different lighting agency. And still the electrical engineer might be in a different city. So once all these guys start to come in for the large scale projects, then everything becomes a little harder to manage. And that's one of the challenges that we face, is to make sure everybody's on the same page and make sure all the messages gets transmitted through the right channels. So here is an example of a project that was specified out of the territory. So the lighting designer is in Denver, ME Engineers, and then the project is in Atlanta. And so in this case, then there's a lot of back and forth with information going from Atlanta to Denver, and then with us sometimes have to talk to the contractors in Atlanta, sometimes talk to people in Denver, and we also had to visit Denver at one point to present the samples. For larger scale projects, simply sending the samples to the specifier's office is not enough, because we have to accompany our samples and make sure the samples get seen, the way they work, and their plus especially how well the fixtures can work within electrically, for example, the infinity technology. We have to convey that to the specifiers. So now we're going to go into each player briefly, independently. So the ownership can typically be developers. They can also be regional or national hotel ownership. For example, Marriott Residency in Courtyard. We've worked on all of these types of hotels. Can be institutions. That's a major ownership group. Can be Ryerson University in downtown Toronto. Can be Boston Community College, where we worked at, and University of New Mexico, etc. There's also municipal, states, and provincial governments. So those are just a brief list of ownership. Of course, it can be as easy as GVA itself. When we need something, we are the ownership, and we can hire lighting designers to do our work. So there are architects as well. Architects typically get hired by the ownership, and their interest is in the look. They typically don't talk in lighting vocabulary. So if you try to talk lumens or watts per foot to an architect, typically they don't care, because that's the work of a lighting designer or an engineer. And they're not too interested in the how, because they're artists, right? They want to get it done. They draw it on a plan, and then other people get it done for them. And occasionally, they do screw up lighting effects. For example, we got a great hall. The floor is currently, it was originally specified to be carpeted, gray carpet. So the carpet actually absorbs light. So the lighting designer does IES file photometry calculations. They specify the wattage and the lumens of the lamps to be a certain output, so that taking into consideration the carpet absorbing a lot of the light. And then the architect trades in the carpet for marble, because the owner said we want something better. So they trade everything for marble, which reflects just like a mirror, and then that's going to interfere with the lighting level in your room. So that's why a lot of times you see last-minute changes. For example, an order can already be in the system, and then suddenly we come to production and we say, instead of 10 watts per foot, now we want 5 watts per foot. Please update all the work orders. So try to excuse us, because a lot of times that's coming from something in the field, such as these type of situations. So, and then after the architects, we have engineers who are in charge of technically making everything work. So they're very keen on wiring, voltage, power. So we're talking about electrical engineers. They're interested in how much. So these guys are interested in keeping the costs low. Of course, usually they're not worried about how the lighting will turn out, because in their minds, that's the job of lighting designers or even lighting manufacturers' job. So the engineers, typically, they're not very experienced at identifying the quality of lighting. So if you take our STR9, which has quad chip, excellent color mixing, you put it in front of them, you have to remind them that we're using quad chip, we're using single optics for 4 different colors, and that and that by doing so, we don't have individual color stripes on the wall. So you have to tell these people about these effects when you present, because otherwise they just don't remember, because they typically deal with the electrical technical side of things. And then we come to lighting designers. So lighting designers, typically they know the ins and outs of lighting, so they're really experts. They know what they're looking for. They can typically be interested in the electrical side of things. However, that's not mandatory. So depending on the lighting designer you talk to, they can be more technical versus some of the other ones. And they're responsible for budgeting the fixture specifications. So at the very beginning, when we do design development, we have to tell them how much our fixture costs, maybe on a per foot basis or on a per fixture basis. So, and they carry that budget towards the end. So we have to make sure that our budget at the very beginning is the same as, or comparable as the budget that we sell it at the very end price. Because otherwise, if there's a mismatch, they might come back and they say, why do you have a mismatch? No, we're over budget and we're gonna use a different manufacturer. So for the same reason that they're responsible for budgeting their fixture specifications, that's why they're interested sometimes in how they work on the electrical side of things. Because when we have our Infinity technology that's capable of running 1,000 plus feet on a single circuit, then lighting designers are interested, because that's going to keep the installation costs low. They can present that as a part of their concept to the owners. Because lighting designers are responsible for their own specifications, sometimes they need to defend their specifications when challenged with a cheaper or alternative product. We have these situations pretty often because our fixtures are very quality made. They're not the cheapest in the market. So oftentimes we have to talk to lighting designers, or we have to defend our specs, or help lighting designers defend their specs of our products. And they can be very, very picky. So all the engineers know this, production know this, why we're so picky about the samples. They have to look perfect. The optics have to look perfect. And then we come to distributors. So distributors' primary function is to facilitate the purchasing of a project, because there's just so many contractors out there. You can start a new contractor company and then you can be given a job on a project. But the distributors, typically they stay in the market. So the big ones, Rexel or Wesco, I think a lot of people have heard about these guys. So they facilitate the purchasing because they typically have credit terms with lighting manufacturers like us. So typical credit term can be next 30 days. So we can ship that to the site and they pay within 30 days. So what distributors do is they can package fixture types. So for example, if a job has Philips fixtures, it has GVA fixtures, it has Hubble fixtures, a distributor is oftentimes what they do is they buy fixtures from everybody and they sell it as a package, lot price, to the contractor. So the contractor oftentimes doesn't know how much the GVA fixtures cost or the Philips fixtures cost. All they know is here's a project, here is the price for the entire project, which oftentimes is good enough for them because the contractors just need to know their cost. But the distributors get involved in the negotiations with different manufacturers and making sure everything is within the budget. And in the process, they make money off it because they package everything and there's extra little room left in the budget. Therefore, they pocket that difference. And another function is they have a shop location. So they have a warehouse. So they can store fixtures when needed. So for example, we have a building. It's under construction. And it takes about a month. But they don't know during which week they will reach the interior portion of the project. And it's a time-sensitive project. So sometimes what the distributor might do is tell the lighting manufacturer to ship the fixture to their facility for storage before they actually do the installation. And lastly, we have the electrical contractors. So of course, they're responsible for the installation. And they typically lack knowledge of the controls beyond basic dimming, like beyond your typical residential 0 to 10 dimming. They get confused. So anything involving DMX or anything else, we have to educate them, or our reps have to educate them on how to wire. They're mostly interested in saving money, however they can. And one thing they love to do is they love to sub out very quality specifications with very cheaply made products, which can be ordered even from Alibaba. So, Recently, we had an example on a bridge specification in Pennsylvania. Our pixel domes are specified on that project, but we found another project which we have trouble finding and on the specifications. And then later we found that last product on Alibaba. So that kind of just show you what contractors can do. They can insert these into projects in order to decrease the overall buy price on a project. So we mentioned lighting sales reps. So this is a big part of today's presentation because they serve a lot of functions in the sales process. Typically, they can be up to 40 to 50 employees in size. But that really depends because one of GVA's most successful lighting reps, Independence Lighting in Pennsylvania, it's a family of 3. So you have your mom, you have your dad, and you have your son. And they do a ton of business with us. Typically, a lighting rep agency, once they reach a certain size, for example, 10 or 20, then there's a division of labor. So there's inside and outside sales, just like us over here. And there's project management, customer service, and controls. They can carry anywhere from 10 manufacturers up to 100 manufacturers. And typically, a large, reputable rep agency can carry 30 to 50 manufacturers. And they typically have exclusive rights to sell GVA products within a certain geographic territory. And they have exclusive rights to show people, do demos within a geographic area. And they earn commissions for generating lighting specifications, not only for sales they make within the territory, but for example, if we have a lighting specifier in New York City, and he or she specifies a project that ends up being in Denver, and that project ends up being sold, then the rep in New York City picks up commission for working with lighting designers in New York City. So here is a diagram showing the lighting reps.
Question.
Yes.
What about the conflict of interest when agency holding 30 to 50 manufacturers? How are they selecting what fixture will be specified on job?
Yeah, so a lot of it depends. A lot of it has to do with, well, of course, there's conflict of interest, but it's more common when you're dealing with traffic lighting, for example, this type of lighting. Then you might have a lighting rep might have 3 or 4 manufacturers. Then they decide, for 100%, which is the entirety of our business, we're going to give 40% to our favorable manufacturer, and then we're going to keep 20% for the other manufacturers to keep them fed. So that depends on the relationship. But also, in the interest of lighting reps, they want to have as many duplicating lighting manufacturers as possible because they might get fired by manufacturers, then they have other options.
But we also pick the ones that have non-competing lines. So for example, we don't, as far as I know, we don't have a rep that has lumen bulbs, right? So
we actually do in Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Victor, it's a good question. We actively make sure at least the new reps we sign do not carry our major competitors. So there are 2 archetypes of rep agencies. There's conglomerate, which represents a major lighting company. Could be Acuity, Cooper, or Hubble. So Acuity, Cooper, or Hubble, inside of each umbrella, they have anywhere from 10 to 20 or more lighting manufacturers who belong to the overall corporation. So they can be different labels. For example, Winona does RGB color changing, but they belong with Acuity. So the conglomerate lighting rep agencies, they're typically big. They're typically more than 20 people, usually 30 to 40 people in a lighting agency. And they have a very good division of labor. So they have their inside-outside team and customer service team and project management team. And then they move by volume, so they sell a ton of products. So their strength is with distributors and contractors because they're able to offer cheaper products at volume pricing. They have more margin to work with, so they can sell product quicker. But they sometimes may be weak with specifiers. But that kind of depends from region to region, depending on how the rep agencies are set up. But there's also independent lighting agencies. So there's actually, I group them into 2 types. So the first type carries a collection of independent lighting manufacturers. So these guys, some of the larger independent lighting rep agencies can be comparable to the conglomerates, because I mean, you can go to the mall and buy from the major chains, but if you really look hard, you can find somebody who does everything by looking harder. So the larger independent lighting rep agencies can also carry 30 to 50 independent lighting manufacturers. And by carrying all of these numbers of lighting manufacturers, they can satisfy every need on a single project. So that's type 1. And type 2 is uncommon, and they focus specifically on theatrical lighting and specialty lighting, which is a lot of what GVA does. And typically what you see with type 2 is these guys are highly trained in terms of controls. They're experts at DMX. And oftentimes what you see in the USA is that the type 2 agents are the ETC control rep. So in addition to using GVA fixtures for color changing and doing stuff on a facade, they can supply control solutions to make everything work. So you might ask, how can an agent influence the specification? Pricing. So especially the big ones, the conglomerate agencies, they can move volume. They have a very good relationship with the manufacturers. Therefore, they can get discounts whenever they want to. And so they can land entire jobs and keep the price manageable. There's relationships. So there's a trust factor. So if there's a history of you working with somebody you purchase from, then of course you can get them to do things for you. If you need something quicker, they'll help you get things quicker. But most importantly, on lighting projects, for example, if things don't work out and there's now extra charges to make people go up and replace the lights, or somehow things just don't work out, there's a trust factor, because the larger rep agencies, they will do everything they can to solve the problems. Of course, it will come back to lighting manufacturers. They will pressure every single lighting manufacturer that's involved. But at the end of the day, if the lighting manufacturer we just can't do it, or it's not our fault, then these guys, they can end up paying for it out of their own pocket to make things right. So that's a major factor why some lighting agencies do better with the specifiers, because the specifiers have a reputation to uphold. So if a project doesn't go right, next time this engineer is going to have a bad name in the territory. So these lighting rep agencies help to uphold the name of the specifiers. So one key function of our agent is they facilitate sample delivery. Oftentimes they keep a sample collection locally. So if you're in Toronto, you want a sample, you want to see a sample today, you're not going to get it from New York City. It doesn't matter how fast the shipping is. So oftentimes the local reps are able to deliver the sample often on the same day, or they can tell the lighting manufacturers such as us that they need it the next day, and then we can ship it to them on the next day. And lastly, what's important is for the lighting designers, if you look at things from the point of view of a lighting designer, they can have 100 lighting manufacturers that they regularly work with. They don't know what's new, and they don't know what product has been discontinued. And if they select a product that's discontinued from manufacturer A, they don't know what to do. So the lighting reps, that's where the lighting reps come in. They can provide advice. When something doesn't work, they know right away exactly what else can we offer from our collection of lighting manufacturers. And they can also answer questions on pricing, and a lot of times they also answer questions on technical issues. And lastly, they keep the specifiers living expenses low, because they can offer entertainment and social outings. So that's actually a major component in a lot of the markets. So we have two types of markets in the USA, very similar in Canada as well. There's specification centers, so places like New York City or Los Angeles or Washington, D.C., there's a high concentration of lighting designers. So these are spec centers, so a lot of our samples actually go there. So one of the notables about these specification centers is that frequently they generate specifications in out of territories. So a job that's in Washington, D.C. can end up being in Toronto, for example. A lot of the sales generated from design and specifications. So that's related, because they generate the specification, but the project is elsewhere. So in these specification centers, they support a specific type of reps, which is boutique reps. So the boutique reps, they don't carry a large number of lines. They don't carry 30 to 40 manufacturers, although some do. They can carry as little as 10 different manufacturers or 20. But what these boutique reps do is because when you're involved in these specification centers, there's a lot of exciting projects. There's a lot of projects that require specialty lighting, color changing lighting, or very high towers. Then the sales volume generated from these specification centers support boutique reps who only represents and are knowledgeable about our types of lighting. And the rest of the country in the USA, places like Salt Lake City or Minneapolis or Detroit, typically they're dominated by the larger reps. So they have larger projects that can be designed from out of state. In contrast to specifications generated in spec centers, a lot of the sales from the rest of the country are generated by local contractors, distributors, and owners, oftentimes without the involvement of a lighting designer. So in the rest of the country, then, conglomerate reps such as Rocky Mountain, who represents Cooper, the corporation, Cooper Lighting. Pulse Products represents Cooper. Michigan Lighting Systems in Detroit represents Hubble. So typically, for the rest of the country, in these middle of the America states, we choose larger conglomerate agencies who already represents a major corporation. So what value does GVA present to our agent? First of all, we provide cutting-edge technology. Infinity, there's no equal in the market. Unibody, we're well known for more than 8 years now. And then Color Amp, most recently. So we have no equals with this technology. And we're among an elite class of companies. So really, these are our day-to-day competitors. Philips, Color Kinetics, who's owned by Philips, Traxon, who's owned by Osram, and Lumenpulse. So what's common about all three companies is that these companies are public. Lumenpulse used to be public. They just went private again. So they're much larger than us. They spend a ton of money on marketing, whereas our major selling point is the build quality and cutting-edge technology. So imagine you have a market that's big. For example, you have New York City, and the market is so big that it can support 8 to 10 different lighting reps. Then as a lighting rep, you want to get in on these projects. So these projects require that you package, or you're being able to supply every single type of lighting fixture for this project. Then it becomes important for you as a lighting rep to at least have one of these companies or GVA. So really, when you look at it, there's only 4 choices: 1, 2, 3, and us. And depending on from project to project, sometimes we're the most favorable manufacturer, sometimes it's one of the other ones. So when you look at the point of view from a lighting agency, then we're really valuable, because if you are on bad terms with GVA, and if you part ways with GVAs, then you better have a plan B, because otherwise the door is shut for you to get on one of these projects. So as a follow-up to your question on whether they carry multiple manufacturers, the answer is yes, of course. Lighting reps want to carry multiple manufacturers doing the same thing. They want to be able to slash the prices of the manufacturers. But on the flip side, then, we have very little equals. And that's what makes us unique, because basically we negotiate on our terms. If you represent Lumenpulse, then you can represent us in most cases. So by having, for a lighting rep, by having one of these guys or us, they're able to bid on project packages that contains high-performance architectural lighting. Because keep in mind, if you're in Denver, you want to purchase specialty lighting, and you don't have one of these guys and us, and you have to answer to the lighting designer in New York City who wants to make sure all the lighting effects are perfect, then unless you carry one of us, you're not going to get in on the package, because you can ask another rep agency to help you to put the package together. But if you're in Denver, you don't have GVA, you ask for the GVA rep to supply part of the GVA fixtures. What's going to happen is, if the fixture costs $5,000, you're going to end up paying $10,000 or $20,000 to get GVA on that project. So that makes it very hard for you to stay under the budget. That's why rep agencies want us. And one of our key values to our agents and to lighting designers is our lead time, because our lead time is typically 6 to 8 weeks in comparison to some of the other lighting manufacturers out there. And lastly, very important is we have a very energetic engineering team with the ability to tailor products to specific applications. So big thanks to all of our engineers in the room. And also our production teams for finishing all the customizations. So big question is then, how can we stay on specifications? So first of all, to be available, because we started out small. I remember almost 5 years ago when I joined the company, we had a much smaller sales office. At one point, I think we had 3 people in the sales office. And the engineering office, at one point, I think we had maybe 5 people in the engineering office. So we started out small. And that's what made us, that's what kept our culture in communicating with the lighting specifiers. Our culture is that we're always available, we respond quickly, and we get you quickly involved with the product managers if the situation needs it. So for example, sometimes I involve Chris or Dimitri or any of the engineers whenever a project needs customization. And that really makes the lighting designers and engineers, that makes them feel special because that makes them feel that their voice is heard, and in fact their voice is heard, versus some of the other manufacturers, for example Traxon, who is known to either they say no very easily, or they take forever to respond to you, or they say yes to you initially, and then when the project is ready to be purchased, they tell you we cannot do it. So that's where one of our competitive edges. And of course being able to customize, but we promise as a sales department we try to keep it minimal. And very important, we have to maintain our technological edge. We've had Infinity for 5 years. Maybe people are thinking of copying us, but so far we don't have anybody who does the same thing. Color amp, we introduced it last year. We don't know anybody who's doing the same thing for architectural lighting. And unibody, we had it forever. Nobody is doing this. So, and you know, we have to maintain our technological edge and also introduce new technology to the marketplace. And lastly, maintain and improve our product reliability. So when we're able to do all of that, then we foster trust and ongoing partnerships, not only with the specifiers, but with regional distributors and contractors who then really know GVA products. And then next time, they're willing to tell the owner that I've worked on a GVA project, everything worked out very well, the effects are awesome. And then the owner is much more likely to use GVA when everybody gives positive references. So a couple examples of project customizations. For example, for the highlighter, our highlighter team came up with right angle corners for these type of applications, and that really makes the lighting look perfect on this project. So this was a residence in Anaheim. So a lot of the guests who go to Disneyland actually stays at the residence inn. This is a bridge in Sweden, and in this case we have very custom louvers for the bridge lighting. So we've covered the typical sales process of an architectural sales. Is there any questions before we move on to a short point by point of other sales? Okay, so one of the other sales that we do is called design builds. So design builds can typically occur very quickly. They can take, for example, a week to develop or even a few days to develop. So what typically happens is the facility manager who owns the facility, for example, there is a local pump station that does water treatment. They have some extra money towards the end of the year, and they want to do some cool lighting to remind people that your tax dollar is at work. So the facility manager can call on their favorite contractors they work with from day to day, and they want a proposal from the contractor. So the contractor, what they do is they're going to call their favorite sales reps or distributors who they work with. And then the local sales reps would call GVA for solutions. And then GVA, typically that would be me. I would call Yasser or Peter and say, guys, we need a plan for lighting, let's discuss. So then we provide a rendering and the list of materials, and then we do the quoting. And then depending on the project, sometimes they ask for a mock-up. And that's also one of the reasons sometimes when you see very quick mock-up samples. So not only for specifiers, but for very quick design builds. For example, now is October, end of October. Let's say somebody needs stuff installed by Christmas. Then, it could be true. Tomorrow or sometime, I might be asking production to produce an HL sample to ship to site. So sometimes they need very quick mock-up samples as well. And once everything is approved by the owner, then very quick go ahead, moves through a distributor, PO comes to GVA, and we make the products. So some example of design builds, and they're not small. So this one is the original Salvation Army's headquarters in Detroit. When we first worked on these projects, they didn't even have computerized CAD drawings. We had to work with scanned blueprints dating from the early 1900s to work on this project. And then this project, we got a call out of the blue. Shannon picked up the call from a lighting rep who wanted to sign with us in Houston. And they kind of dangled as a bait to GVA. They said, we have this project. We can use a lot of your new FL100 fixtures. And if you guys want to take this project, you have to sign us up as your rep. So that's a sign of how much people want us right now, because they know sometimes it's not effective coming to you as a sales rep and say, GVA, we want you guys. No, they have to have projects coming to us to show us that they can sell our products. So aside from these design builds, sometimes and oftentimes we get opportunity to do subs and alternates. For example, there is a lighting package or a project that's going ahead. A rep in the territory doesn't represent the manufacturer being specified, so that could be Lumenpulse, for example. So a rep then, they have to put in their package. Therefore, they come to GVA and ask GVA to propose a similar product to be used. Or Lumenpulse, who is specified on the project, they're over the budget. So they're over the budget, they can't come down. So the lighting reps and the local lighting engineers and lighting designers, they're allowing other manufacturers to submit proposals to substitute the lighting with other lighting at a cheaper price. Or what can also happen is, for example, you're working with a manufacturer and they cannot deliver on their promise. So for example, can be due to binning, can be due to specific colors, lumens. A big one is lead time, but GVA can. So we can go in and substitute people's products. And lastly, there can be a project and it uses low voltage. So you can be using an imitation of the highlighter HLDL fixture. But the difference is their fixture can only run at 24 volts DC. That means over a run of 100 feet or 200 feet, they have to use 4 to 8 power supplies, which means more wiring. But the contractor is now educated with GVA Infinity technology, so they know that if they use GVA, they only need to put in 1 or 2 power supplies. So at that point, then they will come to our local lighting rep and say, why don't you guys propose your equal, and then we'll make sure you can go in as a product to be used if your pricing works out. And lastly, contractors like GVA sales reps much more than other reps. And this is often an overlooked part, because when you look at a contractor, they're not interested in making everything perfect. They want everything just to work okay so they can pick up their check. But guess what? Our local reps might be entertaining them. They might be taking them out to golf and fishing. So if they like our reps much more than the other reps, they're going to want to use GVA. That's also part of the reason that in the years past, we tend to have more independent lighting reps when we're smaller. And we moved to Hubble Reps, who is the third largest lighting corporation. And in the recent years, what we've seen is we're taking on, most of our reps are now actually Cooper. And some of them are actually Acuity, who is the largest lighting corporation in North America. So as we make that move, our reps have better relationship in the territory. That means they in turn can sell more of our products.
Actually, John,
Mhm.
go back to the
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to mention that even though that we have people that we can sub and we're going after various projects, other people are also doing that for us. So just as easily as, somebody doesn't rep GVA,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're trying to sub us with Lumenpulse. or GVA is over budget. They're trying to sub us with somebody else.
Mhm.
So we're fighting to keep our specs just as hard as we're fighting for these subs and alternates.
Yeah, it's absolutely a double-edged sword. So that's why sales always go to engineering and say, can you make this fixture cheaper, with more lumens, better optics, et cetera, et cetera. So internationally, I'm going to quickly go over the differences, but of course you can talk to Nilu if you're interested in how the sales process work internationally. For example, in Europe, we work directly with European distributors and designers. We work directly with distributors in other parts of the world, for example, 3S International, who does a ton of sales with GVA historically and ongoing. And sometimes we have specifications generated across the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean. So we have projects from Europe landing in North America or vice versa. So here's a nice project. So this is Todd's boutique store in the Miami Design District. So it's a very posh, fashionable district in Miami where people go to shop. And this project was designed by Italian specifier. I forgot who is the name.
Was it Effetto Luce?
Yeah, Effetto Luce. Yep.
That's STR9 or?
STR9. STR9. Yep. Yeah, so we're at the end of the presentation. So I know a lot of questions are going to be asked. So I'm going to head into FAQ first. Do we really need to build these samples tomorrow? Answer is yes. So just to recap the presentation, lighting designers have to sell their concepts as well. So if you're a salesperson, you typically have a time constraint to work with. Sometimes they have to sell that concept within 1 or 2 days. That's why we have to get those samples to them as quickly as possible. But if that's not a need, then typically we can work with 2 to 3 weeks of sample lead times. Ideal lead time is a big question that's asked, and that kind of ties in back to the point Shannon brought up about lead times and costs. So typically, our current lead time of 6 to 8 weeks is ideal. Just to use as a comparison, Philips Color Kinetics, who is a major competitor of ours, they tend to keep their product on the shelves for quick ship. So they can even ship next day if they want to. But if they're out of stock, because they're manufactured oftentimes in Asia and other parts of the world, it can take up to 16 weeks for them to replenish their stock. And that's a lot of times when we can sub out Philips products, is because we have a shorter lead time. But the thing here is if our lead times start to regularly hit the 10 to 12 week mark, then it becomes hard for our entire sales chain, starting from us account managers to our lighting reps, to continuously push out GVA. Because if our products keep on shipping 10 to 12 weeks, then it becomes very comparable to the 16 weeks that Philips can provide. Then oftentimes what you'll find is Philips or even Lumenpulse, in some cases, they're cheaper than GVA fixtures. At least that's what's happening right now in terms of cost. So as long as we can typically stay within 6 to 8 weeks, then everything is good. And that's it. Any questions?
I'll just add one more thing. So the biggest asset you have is always in this industry service, which then translates, if you have repeatedly good service, that translates into good relationships. And a lot of times, even for us, it's hard to break good relationships because specifiers are sometimes willing to specify worse product, but that's because they have a good relationship and a good history with somebody. But that goes as well the other way. So if we need a sample for, let's say, a small project, and we say, okay, we really need it fast, we might get the small project, but it also helps us to kind of gain points with the designer. So next time they have a $2 million project, then we're already on their radar, and they're like, okay, I had a good relationship with them. So it's and you might not see it right away that okay, maybe this sample is so important, but in the long term, it might very well be.
Yeah, like. So all the entertaining, all the being friends with everybody is very important, but it comes down to service, and from service we get trust. Once you build trust with designers and contractors, even then they keep on coming back to you.
Have you ever gotten any suggestion from an Asian that is probably, let's say, in Europe or in the States somewhere, that we don't have a product for, and we acted upon developing the product from scratch, from just Mayor for that suggestion.
I think you got your answer from the engineers.
No, I didn't.
We do it now.
All the time, but we always do analysis. We do, for example, the Goro.
Okay, so if we get it all the time, can you tell us what is the time frame from that birth of that product till shipping? Would be 6 to 8 weeks as well?
No, it typically takes longer. Well, you have to differentiate from customization and a brand new product. Do you mean by brand new product that we need a brand new PCB, brand new construction?
Everything's brand new
If it's
from the design.
yeah, then we really have to do a thorough analysis. Typically, what tips off these type of actual product development is the promise of a very large volume, such as a Goro. When we first started to work on the Goro, we were promised a lot of volume based on shopping malls that are going to come, and once we develop it, we're going to sell a ton of it. But then the time frame we're looking at is typically months. So in the past, we allow, I don't know, half a year, could be 4 months, could be longer, depending on how much work is needed. For example, if you take a look at a product such as Goro, we can purchase the various components, chip on board, heat sink, and a driver. We can put them together. We just need to design the housing. But another product such as the highlighter, if we want to reinvent the highlighter in a different capability, then we have to start from scratch, and that can take a year even.
I have a question about conflict of interest in electrical contractors. So if an electrical contractor, let's say they originally specified GVA and then they sub it out for some cheap tape light.
Mm-hmm.
So they install the tape light the first time, save all the money, tape light starts to fail. Do they then benefit again as they get to go and replace it all?
Yeah, it depends. So they typically they have to offer, typically they do offer some type of warranty to the owner, so they have to go in and replace the tape light. So of course there's no cost benefit for them eventually if they decide to use a tape light. So, but also it depends on how quickly the tape light fails. If the tape light fails within a year or a year's mark, then yes, they're going to take a financial hit. But if the tape light start failing at 2 to 3 years, then the contractor might say, sorry, these are the typical expected lifetimes of these products. But what happens is then the contractor will be, especially the large contractors, they will be worried about their reputation. So they will take into account what are the chances of a cheaper product failing in these situations. And also, if that product is specified with GVA, if they got a pricing from our rep, and then they later decide on substituting using a cheaper product, then the next time they want to work with our rep, then they have to take that into consideration because they basically screwed our rep as well in the process. Okay, so that's it. Thanks everyone.